Hey, and welcome to another episode of SAP Tech Bytes. Today, we're going to continue with our end-to-end sample, and we're going to build the Advocates app with the SAP BTP SDK for iOS, and we're taking the UIKit based approach. So this is part one. We're going to build the first screen with a list of the available advocates. So let's get started.
So what you see here is the Advocates app within SAP Mobile Services. I've created the App Cloud application configuration already. And this is just the basic setup, the Advocates app. And I've enabled offline access and already created the destination to the Advocates service. In this case, V2, because I want to use offline OData and no authentication. So if we ping that, we should see a successful ping. Then here, I got the SAP BTP SDK assistant for iOS, and you can see I connected the assistant with my mobile services account already. So let's say create new, and here I can say reuse existing application because I got this application already defined, and we select the account. Just do a quick log on. And here I can see the Advocates app already being in there. And I say next. And here I can create the Xcode project. So I just call this Advocates app. And we just going to save that thing right on the desktop here. And we say next. The proxy classes we leave as is. And here we say we want to have the onboarding as well as the master detail screens for my destinations. And I say finish. So what happens now is it uses the Xcode CLI to create the Xcode project stub and insert all the generated code in there. For example, with the proxy classes and the OData service layer, it will fetch the metadata document from the Advocate service and use a parser to create those proxy classes. So I got the Xcode project here, and we have this proxy classes group in here with the public API, and we can see this has a skill, it has a member, and all the other tables as well, or entities. And we can see here it has all the properties, and we can create those proxy classes and then fill in the values as we need if we would create a new entry. In that case, when we fetch data through the entity container here, you see fetch member, it will create such a member and fill it with the information from the backend service. Here, if we open the main storyboard, you can see the master detail screens being created here in a split view controller. So if we run that now on an iPhone 12, we should see the Advocates app being in there with the onboarding flow and all of that. While this is compiling, let's just quickly look into the onboarding here. We see we have the onboarding flow provider. This class here just represents the onboarding flow and makes sure that our onboarding shows the right screens and does its job properly. And here we got the simulator coming up with our compiled app. And until now, we haven't written any line of code. We got a backend connection out of the box. If we would have authentication, we would get that out of the box. We have, because I've defined the offline OData as well as the push notifications, we have all the related code for that generated as well. And we have the master detail screens here, just as a quick showcase on the power of the assistant. So here we got the first screen of the onboarding process. We can say start, and it will connect to SAP BTP, to the SAP ID service. Here we have to log on. So let's just do this. And of course, Okay, now the authentication was successful, and the onboarding process should start. So we have the data privacy here. You can customize all of those screens with your own text and put PDFs behind that. So we just say allow. And same here, just allow. We just go through the onboarding process. By default, every app generated with the assistant has a passcode policy. This is just another security layer on top. And here we just got to confirm the passcode. We can get rid of that passcode policy over SAP Mobile Services. And I show that to you in a second. What we see here is the synchronizing data. This is because I've activated offline OData, and it would synchronize the entities I've defined. As we haven't done anything there yet, it just goes with the default way. Here we can see the push notifications, as I selected that as a feature for this Advocates app. We get that prompt automatically without having to write any line of code. So we just say allow. And here we can see the destination, we see the entities, we see the members with their IDs. And if we go in there, we have all the details of that member as well. We got the navigation here as well to the skills. And we can now browse the data, which is from the OData service directly. And this is working. And we haven't written any line of code here. We haven't done anything except of click through the assistant and created that mobile services cloud application definition. What we want to do now is actually have the Advocates app being built. So in the main storyboard, we open that up. We don't need all those screens here because we're going to make up our own views. So we just hit Command A and delete those. And here I'm going to add a new table view controller, which is going to display all the advocates in a list. And this thing is going to be embedded in a navigation controller. And this navigation controller is going to be our initial view controller. From that table view controller, which is going to be our advocates list, we want to have a navigation to a detail screen of our advocates. So we want to add a view controller right next to it and create a segue from the table view controller to our detail view. And we just say here, show detail. This will make sure that our detail view controller is going to be displayed in a modal fashion, conform to the iOS platform. The next part would be to set the identifier on the segue. This is necessary to identify the navigation segue and interfere with it, so we can make additional changes or execute necessary code before the navigation actually happens. So we just say show AdvocatesDetail here, and those two view controllers, table view controller and the view controller itself, need a class representation, so it actually has logic. So what we do here is we say new file, and we want the Cocoa Touch class because we live in UIKit right now. And we want this UI table view controller, and we call it AdvocatesTableView controller. So just put advocates in front of that. Swift is correct, and we just say next and create. And we got our AdvocatesTableView controller here. The other class we need is going to be a view controller Cocoa Touch class. So we change this back to view controller. Actually, this should be UI controller. There you go. And we call this AdvocatesDetail view controller. And we say next, create that as well, and go back to the main storyboard and set those custom classes on our defined screens here, right here over the identity inspector. So here we can say this is the AdvocatesTableView controller. We get auto completion already. And here we can say this is the AdvocatesDetail view controller, and that works as well. So how do we make the screen appear after the onboarding process. For that, we got the application UI manager. The application UI manager is a generated class managing the complete application screen flow. That means it starts with the onboarding process, and after that shows whatever you feel fit to be shown there. So here we got the show application screen, and we gotta get rid of all of that code because we don't need this anymore. And in here, we just instantiate the initial view controller, which is, of course, our navigation controller. And the navigation controller will make sure that our AdvocatesTableView controller is going to be the first screen on the stack. So I've prepared that here, so we can say we want to have our app view controller, and do a mistake here. Let's get rid of all of that. So here we got our UI storyboard, and that is of main with name main, and we can say instantiate initial view controller, which is a UI navigation controller, and again we have our app view controller, which is our base, and put that navigation controller on top of that. This app view controller will then be set to the root view controller of our window, and that's all we got to do for these screens to appear. So if we rerun that, compile it, and run it on a simulator, we should see an empty table view controller appear. So first we got to put in the passcode for the passcode policy. And we see our empty table view controller right here. So the passcode policy, I don't want to put in every time I test my application. So we go back here to my app configuration in SAP Mobile Services. So we go into Mobile Settings Exchange, and in here we can disable the passcode policy, and we won't see that again. So we just say save, and the next time we recompile the app, we should not have to put in the passcode policy. We might have to onboard again, but that's all right. So back in Xcode, we want to actually show some information and some data in our table view controller. So for that, we go into the AdvocatesTableView controller, and then here we import all the necessary SAP frameworks. So we need SAP Common for logging, SAP Fiori for the UI, SAP Fiori Flows. We need to retrieve the onboarding, the OData controller, which is in the onboarding flow. So SAP Fiori Flows. Then we have SAP Foundation, SAP OData, and of course offline OData here as well. So let's just go in and create the needed class properties here. First, we want to make sure we got our logger. So we have private logger, and then we have that single here, shared, and we call that AdvocatesTableView controller logger. Then next we have the segue identifier I like to store in my class. So we just call it identifier, and we set that to whatever value we've put here. Oh, come on. Show AdvocatesDetail. Go back in here and put that in here. Now we want to have a loading indicator. So I just call it a loading indicator because we're going to use one of the helper classes in case of this, in this case, not class but protocol, which is the SAP Fiori loading indicator we can use, and that expects us to have that property loading indicator in there. And I might have mistyped, so we just let the auto completion help us here. So now we want to take care of actually retrieving the entity container, and for that we got to get the destinations, because that's where the endpoint lies, right? So we can just define let destinations, and because it's quite some code, I've copied that and go through here with you. So we're going to take the file configuration provider and we're going to load the file app parameters. And the file app parameters you can find in the onboarding, and the app parameters here have the destination field, so we steal the information from there. So we can say provide configuration, and we want the destinations configuration as a dictionary, and that allows us to access the destination parameters. Next, what we want to do is we want to get the OData controller. So we say OData controller. Actually, we just call it entity container, and that's going to be a var, as it is a computed property. And this is of type entity container. And because we're using the offline OData, we want to have the offline OData provider in here. And this is actually optional because in here we have that guard-led OData controller statement. And I walk you through that piece of code right now. So we say we want that onboarding session manager, and in there we got this onboarding session, and that onboarding session has OData controllers, and here we can pass in the destination value of our advocate service. This could be different on your end depending on what your destination name actually is, and then we just safely parse that in the offline OData controller for that destination. And we have the entity container, which we can use the OData controller to retrieve. Right here, if there is an issue, we show an alert dialog with the alert helper, also generated helper class from the assistant. If not, we just return the entity container. And with that, we can actually start loading data. So we need two more properties here. One, to store the loaded members. So we call that advocates. And that's going to be an array with members in there. And later on, we also want to have the selected advocate being ready, so we can pass that into the detail screen. So we just create that here already. And we say member. So in the view.load itself, we should just do some table view setup. And of course, this is just some basic table view stuff, so we conform a little bit more to the SAP Fiori design guidelines. So this is just what we need here, and we register the FUI object table view cell already because that's what we're going to need when we want to display the advocates. Also, I want to change the navigation title of that screen to be developer advocates, and I want to add a refresh control as well, so I can do pull to refresh, and we can do this simply by adding this add target refresh control. This is the refresh method which will get executed, and we add the refresh control as a subview here. Of course, this refresh method is not defined yet, so I just define this method right below. So this is just going to call refresh, where we do a dispatch queue global async, and we call load data and dispatch back to the main queue and the refresh control itself. So we got our new data here. Now it wants us to define the load data method, and the load data method is being split in two parts, and two methods actually, it's just not one. So here we have the data loading, and we have this update table view, and this is actually what we're going to call in here in the view.load to initially load the data. And here we show the Fiori loading indicator, and then we call load data. And then we say TableView reload your data. So redraw yourself, reload the data, and redisplay them. Do some logging and hide the Fury loading indicator. The load data itself gets passed in a completion handler, which is an escaping closure. And here we can call the entity container and say fetch member, which is actually fetch members. This is some mistake on my side with the advocate service that the name is not correct here. So just disregard that. Fetch members, we're going to fetch a list of members, and you can see that we get some members in an error. We check if there is an error. If there is an error, we display an alert and return out of that function, do nothing. If there is no error, so it goes through here, we can set the members to our advocates, call the completion handler to go out of that closure and do the update. Let the update table do the rest here. Now that we got our data loading in place, we want to actually display that data as well. And for that, we have our TableView data source methods down here. Number of sections would be 1. Numbers of rows in section is the advocates count at this moment. And in the cell for row add, we can define what has to be displayed if we actually have data. And here we can simply say that we want to retrieve the advocate, which has to be displayed. So we can say the advocate would be the advocates, and then index path.row. Then we dequeue our table view cell. Of course, the FUI object table view cell reuse identifier we're using to dequeue the FUI object table view cell. And we have to parse this to the FUI object table view cell so we can access the properties of that cell. Now we just populate the cell's data and we're good to go. So what we do here is we say that our cell accessory type is detail disclosure button because we want to display a detail. And as all properties on those proxy classes are optional, we will have to safely unwrap them. So I'm using a flat here for first name, last name, title, and the focus area. Set the data and return the cell. If there is something wrong here, we just say no data available and return the cell either way. Now we want to make sure that the user can tap on one of the advocates to get a detail. So we want to have the did select row add override, and in here we can basically say self selected advocate equals to the advocates index path.row, so the current advocate for that index path, and then just say self perform segue with identifier, and then we have our segue identifier here. Sender is just the class itself, the table view controller, and then we're almost good to go. We can already set up the navigation. So we have that stub in here, and in the prepare for segue, we can just simply instantiate the advocate detail view controller and set the selected advocate on there. That's all you got to do. Of course, the advocate detail view controller is going to complain here because, first of all, I misspelled that because it's advocates detail view controller, and it doesn't have the property advocate now. So we just create it real quick in here, where we say var advocate is of type member and we're good to go here. Going back to the table view, we just built, and the compile time error should go away. And then we can run the application to see how that looks like. And if I haven't done any mistakes, this should look pretty good. This is the passcode policy here is because we have to actually, I think, in that case, reinstall the Advocates app. So we can do that by just deleting the app from our simulator and just redeploy it. So we got to go through the onboarding process again. So I'm gonna just log in real quick. So we've seen the OAuth or the authentication error here, and that was actually a restriction of the trial. We had too many user registrations. So in mobile settings exchange and user registrations, you can delete your registered users, and then you should be able to re-onboard your client here. So let's just do this again. And after the onboarding process, we actually shouldn't see the passcode policy because we deactivated that. So let's see if that works. So yeah, that worked. Now we have the onboarding process again, so just go through this. And it's going straight into synchronizing data because we deactivated the passcode policy. And I forgot to add the refresh control in the storyboard to the actual element here. So we gotta do this real quick. In the main storyboard, you select the AdvocatesTableView controller, and then in here you can say refreshing is enabled, and that gives you a refresh control automatically on that table view, and then that should work. So just recompile, run the app again. And what we see is our data being displayed in the table view in a really nice and a really nice lined way. We have the information button right here, the information or the detailed disclosure indicator. We got our advocates being displayed here as well. And we also can do the navigation. Of course, this is not displaying anything yet. As you see, it's empty. So, but that works, which is good.
All right, we finished our first screen of the Advocates app with the UIKit based approach. And you've seen this is fairly simple if you have experience or a basic knowledge of iOS development with Xcode. And the next time, we're going to implement the details screen for each of those advocates. So see you next time.